On the Texas border with Mexico in the 1870s, there was a specialized group of Army scouts charged with hunting down the Comanche. But these were not veterans of the recently fought Civil War, nor were they the vaunted newly formed Buffalo Soldiers. These men were a unit unto themselves, composed of Afro-Indigenous Seminole scouts who were experts at survival, at tracking, and at frontier warfare. By the spring of 1875, they were already seen as heroes by their fellow soldiers, but the events of April of that year would see them become legends. Join us now for the Battle of Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass, Texas, April 25, 1875. Private Pompey Factor wipes the sweat from his eyes, clearing his vision of the near-apocalyptic sight before him. Sweeping down upon his position are dozens of incensed Comanche warriors, all intent not only on killing Pompey Factor and his 3 fellow soldiers, but hoping to accomplish this grisly task via the long, drawn-out tortures they have become famous for across the frontier. Factor and his mates are well aware that the coming minutes will spell either their doom or their salvation, and that the former scenario is far more likely. Pompey Factor, Sergeant John Ward, and trumpeter Isaac Payne, all members of a mixed-race Black and Seminole contingent of scouts attached to the famed Buffalo Soldiers, are locked in a desperate battle with an exponentially larger attacking force of Comanche warriors. Despite the cultural and ethnic mix present on the battlefield, the U.S. Army has, 10 years after the completion of the Civil War, still not changed their requirement that officers in command of these units be white. Thus, in command on this day is Lieutenant John Bullis. However, at this very moment, regardless of their personal backgrounds or the greater ramifications of United States federal policy, all 4 men are concerned solely with the immediate threat of the Comanche warriors now bearing down upon them. They are all experienced warriors. Lieutenant Bullis is a respected veteran of the Civil War, and not only have all these men spent the preceding year fighting the vicious Red River War, but these 3 scouts, Pompey Factor, John Ward, and Isaac Payne, have grown up in lives radically different from their cohorts serving in the Buffalo Soldiers. Following the abolition of slavery and the conclusion of the U.S. Civil War, the Army had formed 4 regiments of black soldiers, most of whom were former slaves. These regiments wasted no time in proving their skill and daring as they fought in campaigns against the Plains tribes, a conflict that had reignited with America's post-war revival of enthusiasm for westward expansion and for settlement. Though the origins of the term Buffalo Soldier are in fact highly contentious, one theory holds that the troopers were one of the few units outfitted with buffalo hide coats to combat the open plains winter chill, and the locally sourced and supplied buffalo coats presented a viable, affordable, and very effective solution to the Army's supply chain conundrums. Thus, oftentimes when a soldier from one of the newly formed regiments was seen for the first time by a Plains tribe warrior, he would be sporting one of the heavy, full-length buffalo coats. However, regardless of the origins of their name, the legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers, even 9 years after their inception, is one of notable gallantry and exceptional courage in combat. Many, if not most, of the men in these regiments see their service as an opportunity to prove their merit and worth in a country that, though it had granted them their freedom, was still deeply divided amongst itself and in many instances openly hostile towards them. But many of them also see this as a chance at adventure, to see lands that they had never seen before, and combat an enemy that most had only heard of. However, this is not the case for their cohorts in what are known as the Seminole Scouts. Though they are indeed of shared racial background with their fellow Buffalo Soldiers, they are in fact part of a rich and storied heritage of escaped slaves who had assimilated into various tribes in the American Southeast. Most prominent among these were the mighty Seminole, themselves a tribe who owned and traded slaves, though they also fought Southern slavers seeking to recapture their escaped slaves. They also combated the U.S. government's attempts to take over their own homelands and warred incessantly with their hated enemies, the Creek. In the wake of what would come to be known as the Trail of Tears, the Seminole, along with many other eastern tribes, were forcibly relocated to what is today the state of Oklahoma. This resulted not only in inhumane treatment from the United States government, but a whole new danger in attacks from tribes native to the area, most notably the Kiowa and the Comanche. After years of enduring the misery of their newly imposed locale, the sizable number of mixed-race Seminole, weary of racial tensions and poor treatment from virtually all of their new neighbors, migrated to northern Mexico at the invitation of the Mexican government. Though Mexico had abolished slavery in 1837 and could guarantee some kind of reprieve from the antebellum tensions of America in 1850, their motives were also, in large part, self-serving. Much as they had with the Texans nearly 2 decades earlier, the Mexican government intended to use the settlers on the border as fodder of sorts for the Comanche, Kiowa, and Apache raids that had long terrorized the Mexican settlements to the north. Regardless, though they were no doubt aware of these problems to some degree, large numbers of Seminole moved south into the mountainous, rough-hewn borderlands that comprise northern Mexico. Here, for nearly 2 decades, they survived and even thrived in an entirely new and notoriously unforgiving environment while under relatively constant attack from the Comanche, the Kiowa, and the Apache. One of the most experienced scouts, Pompey Factor, had been born in 1849, the son of an escaped slave and a mother who belonged to the Biloxi tribe. His family, too, had grown tired of the constant turmoil in the South and elected to move to northern Mexico. Though most of the southeastern tribes were staunch Baptists, many, Pompey Factor included, were Jesuit-educated and well-read. Following the conclusion of the Civil War in 1865 and the abolition of slavery, many of the mixed-race Seminole ventured back north of the Rio Grande, and many had enlisted as scouts for the U.S. Army in order to assist in tracking down their old foes in the Kiowa, the Apache, and the Comanche. They are required to furnish their own horses, and they are subject to the orders of the Army officers, but otherwise, they operate with an autonomy unheard of in the Army at this time, and adding to their mystique amongst their fellow soldiers, the Scouts also remain far more adherent to their Seminole culture than anything else. Though most of them wear the blue-jacketed uniform of their Buffalo Soldier cohorts, the Seminole Scouts also sport the trappings of their native forefathers in the forms of leggings, moccasins, necklaces, and in some cases, even headdresses. They are held in awe, even by the toughened and already legendary Buffalo Soldiers, as unmatched trackers and fighters, capable of traveling unheard-of distances on half rations, and doing so repeatedly, day after day, until ultimately tracking down their enemy and emerging victorious. During the previous year's Red River War, they had been used to great effect by Colonel Reynolds Slidell Mackenzie as he had pursued Quanah Parker and those amongst the Comanche in northern Texas who refused to acquiesce to being confined to reservations in Oklahoma. They had all served with distinction, including Lieutenant Bullis, who had bolstered his reputation with several instances of personal bravery and selflessness that had solidified his deep bond with his men. His relationship with his men is described as more familial than militaristic. It was said that every time a scout had a new child, the lieutenant would visit their camp and act in place of a presiding chief, examining the baby and exclaiming that the child would indeed go on to grow strong and brave. This familial bond is a requirement for men who work in such small teams and in such remote places. The typical job of the Scouts sees them in conditions such as the ones they have found themselves in today on the Rio Grande River on a far more frequent basis than any of their comrades in the conventional forces. Lieutenant Bullis, Sergeant John Ward, Private Pompey Factor, and Private Isaac Payne had all been in hot pursuit of this raiding party, with the intention of catching them as they attempted to move their stolen horses across the river. The soldiers had all dismounted and snuck to within roughly 75 yards of where the Comanche were now pushing their horses across the river. All experienced fighters and keen to take the offensive, they had begun firing upon the Comanche, keeping up a relatively steady onslaught for nearly 45 minutes. During these early iterations of the battle, the Scouts managed to kill 3 Comanches and wound 1 more. At first, due to the rate of fire and the sheer ferocity of the attack, the Comanche believed there to be a much larger force attacking them. The Scouts are armed with .45 caliber Sharps carbines, as are the vast majority of troopers assigned to serve with the Buffalo Soldiers. These rifles represent a new wave of battlefield technology that has drastically changed the dynamics of combat in the West in the little over a decade since its implementation. Combatants of 10 to 20 years prior were limited to single-shot muskets and rifles whose cumbersome loading processes and maintenance requirements rendered them a liability against foes who are mounted on horses and capable of firing several arrows a minute. Though the advent of the Colt revolver had indeed been a massive jump forward for the American forces in combating the Plains tribes, it is only in relatively recent times when the average soldier and scout could count on being equipped with both long gun and sidearms that are capable of rapid rates of fire. However, as is the course through much of history, this technology does not exist in a vacuum, as for decades now, warriors of the Plains tribes have been acquiring revolvers and repeating rifles of their own. In this case, here on the Pecos River, this party of Comanche are armed with several Winchester lever-action rifles. Once they are able to discern that the force attacking them is not a sizable contingent of infantrymen, but a small group of 4 scouts, they begin to lay down a withering field of fire with their own weapons. In one of these exchanges, roughly 30 minutes into the fight, Sergeant Ward's rifle stock is shattered by a Comanche bullet, and in short order, the Comanche mount an offensive charge. This charge is the one now bearing down upon Pompey Factor and the other scouts. The nearly instantaneous decision is made to retreat to their horses, to mount up, and to ride for their lives now that the tide of battle has turned against them so decidedly. This is commonplace in combat on the Texas frontier, as either side saw little merit in last stands that few, if any of their countrymen, would ever even hear about. Factor, Barnes, and Payne quickly mount up and, in a matter of mere seconds, are riding north towards the relative safety of the larger force of Buffalo Soldiers. Lieutenant Bullis's horse, however, refuses to allow Bullis into the saddle. Somewhere in the chaos of the fight thus far, Bullis has also incurred a gunshot wound to his lower right leg. Though it is a flesh wound, it renders him significantly less mobile than his men. His horse, driven into a frenzy by the chaos of the battle, now spins in tight circles and nips at the cavalry officer, who can only make repeated and increasingly desperate attempts to gain a seat in the saddle. With every revolution of the wild-eyed horse and every passing second, Factor, Ward, and Payne get further away from Lieutenant Bullis, and the attacking Comanche draw nearer. But within moments, the men agree they cannot leave Lieutenant Bullis to die at the hands of the Comanche. So, all three of them wheel their horses around and charge headlong towards an attacking force that outnumbers them roughly 8-1. The men reach Lieutenant Bullis only moments before they are surrounded by dozens of charging Comanche warriors. This chaotic scene only serves to further frighten Lieutenant Bullis's whirling and wide-eyed horse, who again and again rebuffs the officer's efforts to get one of his boots in the stirrups and hoist himself into the saddle. As the lieutenant continues his efforts in vain, Factor, Ward, and Payne empty their rifles into the oncoming warriors. And almost immediately after his first shot, Ward's rifle is shot again, the stock completely shattered and the firing mechanism rendered warped and useless. The fight quickly devolves into a hand-to-hand struggle, with Factor, Barnes, and Payne clubbing and stabbing any warrior who rides within striking range as they do their best to dodge incoming arrows and form a loose three-man perimeter around the still struggling lieutenant. Now, the men are again pinned down. Still, Sergeant Ward manages to make his way to Lieutenant Bullis while Factor and Payne fight off the remaining attackers, actually managing to drive the Comanche into a brief retreat. For the better part of 2 hours, the four men fight off charge after charge from the incensed and incessant Comanche warriors, who only become more and more intent on killing their adversaries as more and more of their comrades fall. Finally, sensing an abatement in the action that might be long enough to grant them escape, the men make a mad dash to the north, with Lieutenant Bullis riding behind Sergeant Barnes, leaving behind the errant, crazed horse. They head towards Fort Clark, nearly 60 miles away. For the better part of a day and a night, the men make their way to the fort, alternating between carrying the wounded Lieutenant Bullis behind them as they continue to scan the countryside around them in search of more Comanche assailants. Finally, all four men miraculously arrive at Fort Clark. Lieutenant Bullis credits his men with repeatedly and publicly, quote, saving my hair. Almost immediately upon their arrival at Fort Clark, Lieutenant Bullis files the necessary paperwork recommending all three enlisted scouts for the Medal of Honor, the United States military's highest award for bravery. On May 28, 1875, Private Pompey Factor, Private Isaac Payne, and Sergeant John Ward are each awarded the Medal of Honor, making them 3 of 18 total men who served with the Buffalo Soldiers who would earn such a distinction. While there is no record as to the personal thoughts of the men upon being awarded their medals, the events of April 25, 1875, will go on to speak volumes in posterity. For his part, Lieutenant Bullis would continue his service in the Army until 1898, retiring at the rank of Brigadier General. After retiring, he would move to San Antonio, Texas, where he served as the U.S. Deputy Treasurer for the Federal Sub-Treasury in San Antonio, essentially the government's local banker. He would serve there until his death in 1911. However, sadly, there is little information on the lives of Factor, Payne, and Ward after their military service. Pompey Factor appears to have first moved to northern Mexico, where he farmed for a number of years before moving just north of the border to Brackettville, Texas, where he would pass away in 1928. He was buried in Brackettville at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery. The details of Isaac Payne's life are even more sparse, stating only that he moved to northern Mexico, also took up farming, and passed away in 1904. He was first buried in northern Mexico, but his remains were later returned to Texas and interred at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery in Brackettville. John Ward would go on to serve until 1894, totaling 24 years in the U.S. Army before retiring to Brackettville. Here, he would make his living as a farmer until passing away in 1911. Like his comrades, Ward is interred at the Seminole Indian Scout Cemetery in Brackettville. But While these three men represent some of the most awarded soldiers of their regiment, their story is not the only one of grit, determination, and survival amongst their ranks. Nor is it the only tale of the Comanche fighting against all odds to hold on to their way of life. However, the countless tales from all sides of great service, sacrifice, violence, and vengeance are, for tonight, other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. Be sure to click the like button, share this episode with a friend, and become a subscriber. Also, if you'd like to support our work and gain early access to episodes as well as ad-free viewing, you can become a member of this channel by clicking on the join button down below. And finally, be sure to follow us on TikTok and Instagram and subscribe to our newsletter. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.